question 2, we have been told that the supervisor of a tourist information desk at a local airport is interested in how long it takes an employee to serve a customer. For a sample of 12 customers, she measures the amount of time taken to serve each one. These times, measured in minutes, are reported below, and we're given our sample of 12 values. For part A, we have to calculate the mean, median, mode, first quartile and third quartile. In part B, we have to do the variance, standard deviation, range, interquartile range, coefficient of variation and z-scores. And then in part C, we have to think about what conclusions we can draw in terms of the time taken to serve a customer. So for this question, we've specifically been told to use Excel, and so we can put our data set into Excel as shown here. We've just labelled the column X's, and then we have our 12 values, and we can work from there and use the built-in functions to go through the various parts of the question. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start over a few columns, and I'm going to begin with central tendency, and so that will mean working through the mean, median and mode and then the quartiles. Now Excel has built-in functions for all of these, and so we can just type in the keyword and Excel will do all the hard work. Now to tell Excel that we want to calculate a formula, we need to begin with equals. That tells Excel that we're typing in a formula rather than just text or a number. And the keyword to calculate the mean, well, Excel actually uses average, so we can just type that in. Excel actually brings up a prompt box to suggest functions based on the letters we're typing in. Average is the one we want. We open brackets, and the idea then is that we tell Excel the data that we want to use. Now here I can see that I start in A2 and then I finish in A13, so I can actually type in the cell references, close my brackets, hit enter, and it does that calculation for us. So that's the mean, and we might just label these as we go. Now the next one we want to do is median. Again, equals, this time our keyword is median, open brackets, and rather than just typing in A2 to A13, I'm going to block on to show you that we can get exactly the same result. Close brackets, hit enter, and we have our median. And so it's just a little bit higher than the mean. We'll then do the mode. Keyword is mode, so equals mode. Again, the data range, I'll just type it in, hit enter, and we can see our mode, in fact, here is a lot less. Okay, for part A, to complete it, we still need to have a look at the quartiles. So we have a quartile function in Excel, and equals quartile. Now, the same function is used for each of the quartiles. We just have to tell Excel which specific quartile we're interested in. So we open brackets. Firstly, we must put in the data array. So A2 to A13. Then it's just a comma. As Excel shows us with its little prompt, it wants the data array, then the quartile that we're using. So comma, and then here I want quartile 1, so I'll just type in a 1. Close my brackets, and Excel gives us that, it's 1.4. We can do the same for quartile 3, except this time we have to change the quart value to 3. So equals quartile, data range, and I put in 3 for quartile 3. Okay, so that gives us our measures of central tendency plus those quartiles that give us the boundaries of the middle 50%. Now in part B, we're going to focus on the measures of dispersion, and so we're going to go through and we're going to work out variance, we're going to work out standard deviation, we're going to work out the minimum, the maximum, the range, the interquartile range, and our coefficient of variation. Now I'm actually going to start with standard deviation because that's the built-in function that Excel has. It's just equals STDEV, and we open brackets and we can put in our data range, hit enter, and we have that standard deviation figure. Now variance, of course, is just the square of standard deviation, and so there's not a separate function for that. We can just say equals, and we want the standard deviation. So I could have used the reference to E9, but we'll just type in the function again. And that result has to be squared. So we use the little hat symbol and then a 2, and that tells Excel that we want to square this result. Now, alternatively, we could have said we wanted to find the square of E9, which was our original standard deviation value. Either one will get you the correct answer. Now, to do range, we weren't specifically asked to do minimum and maximum, but range is the maximum minus the minimum, and we don't have a separate formula in Excel for that, so we have to find the minimum and the maximum. We have a min function, so I can type that in. Oh, must start with equals. Min A2 to A13, so our minimum is 0.6. Our maximum, we can use the max function, A2 to A13, and then range, we still just say equals, but it's going to be the maximum minus the minimum. Now the maximum is in cell E9 minus the minimum, which is E10. If we then say equals, we have that range figure. Now interquartile range, it's also calculated using some other values, Q3 minus Q1. So I've previously calculated those for part A, Q3 minus Q1, and that gives us our interquartile range. CV, well, it's the standard deviation divided by the mean. So again, I can use that technique, equals. Now my standard deviation is in E9, and I need to divide that by the mean, which is in E2. Say OK. Now that gives me the value as a decimal, but if I want to change it into a percentage, I can just hit the percentage button, and if I still want the decimal places, I can add those in using the decimal, the formatting function to add decimal places. Okay, so that gives us those values. We still do have to calculate the z-scores. Now remember, whereas the measures we've been working on so far are based on looking at or summarizing the entire data set, a z-score focuses specifically on individual values and how far away they are from the mean in terms of the number of standard deviations. So I'm going to create a separate z-score column because each of our data values in the sample will have its own z-score. Now Excel can do a lot of that hard work for us, and that's why we wanted you to practice with this question. We just need to set up our z-score formula in Excel. Now remember, a z-score is based on the x value minus the mean, and then we need to divide that by the standard deviation. So we are going to have to use the mean, and I'll just highlight that. We're also going to have to use the standard deviation that we've already calculated. So how do we set them up? Well, I'm going to show you an extra trick here so that I can type out the formula once and then just copy and paste it. Now, equals, I still must begin with equals. What do we need to do? Well, we need to have the x value minus the mean, and that needs to be calculated first, and then we divide by standard deviation. So I need to put that first component in brackets. Now my x is in A2, so I can use the cell reference, subtract the mean, close brackets, divided by standard deviation. Now if I do that and hit enter, it gives me the z-score, no problems. What I want to be able to do is actually copy and paste that formula, and I'll just show you what happens if I try to copy and paste it as it is. So I can actually use the copy and paste buttons, or I can just drag that down. Now if I click onto B3 to see how Excel has copied, what it's done is it's used the next x value. So as I copy down to the next row, it actually changes the reference for the A column to the next row. So that's a good thing. It's using 0.9 now, which is what I want. But in terms of the mean and the standard deviation, as I've changed down to the next row, it's also changed those cell references, but they're no longer correct because the mean is still in E2 and the standard deviation is still in E9. So I can fix that, and the way I do that, I'll just delete that copy, go back to the original one. If I put $ around the reference to where the mean and the standard deviation are, What that does is when I copy and paste that formula, where there are dollar signs, Excel will not increment that cell. It will adjust the A cell reference, so it will go to A3 and then A4, which is what we want because we're using different X's. But the mean and the standard deviation are always in E2 and E9 respectively, and this will keep Excel only using those positions. So I say enter, it hasn't changed the Z-score calculation, but, and I'll just copy all of these and then show you one. If I click on one of these, you can see that it's referencing the right X value, A3 in this case, but it's left the mean and the standard deviation where we wanted them to be. So that's called absolute referencing, and it's very useful when we're wanting to manipulate Excel sheets and use functions, but be able to copy and paste. So that's a good trick to remember. Okay, and if we have a look at the Z-scores, we can see that we've got Z-scores, the lowest one is negative 1.23 if we round off. So in fact, let's just round these off. And our highest is 2.42, so we don't have any outliers in this case. Okay, so part C, we just had to try and summarize what we're seeing here in terms of the customer waiting time. We could say something like the average time to serve a customer is approximately 2.5 minutes, but this varies from 0.6 minutes to 6.1 minutes, probably indicating that some customers just need a yes or no answer or a brochure, but that others needed detailed information.